Hello everyone and welcome back. My name is Bulko, once again here with a class overview of the Bard. I'm going to frame this as always in terms of the roles from my Know Your Role video, so if you're not familiar with those, that might be a good place to start, but otherwise you should be able to follow along just fine. And right off the bat, before I start, I actually do want to say thank you so much for all the support. I'm well over the 4,000 watch hours required to be partnered on YouTube, and as soon as I hit that 1,000 sub mark, I will get that done. So if you would like to help me, definitely hit the subscribe button. That helps the most right now. And otherwise, let's get right into talking about the Bard. So this is my favorite class in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and this is a perfect class if you just want to do a little bit of everything. So if you're like me and you're really indecisive, or maybe you're a veteran player of the tabletop version of the game and you just want a character that's going to fit in no matter which companions you find and end up liking, the Bard is the perfect fourth member in any party because they can fill almost every single role. They are excellent support characters with lots of buffs for their allies. They have a ton of debuffs and crowd control abilities that make them fantastic in that controller role. They have decent blasting with some of their AoE spells. They even have a few single target options in both melee and ranged combat, depending on the build you want. And they have fantastic skill proficiencies as well. The only place where they're a little bit weaker is on the front line, and that's mostly because of their hit dice, but even with the right build, you can get up to a very respectable 18 AC at level 3 without too much work, and that'll serve you well. So let's talk a little bit about how I would build out a Bard, and as always, I'm going to go through a few different options and playstyles that you might want to consider depending on where you're going to take your character. Right away, for a background, I pick Urchin because my Bards tend to be dexterity focused. And that's just because you need charisma, and the best armor you can ever get on a Bard is medium armor anyways, and a dex build is liking medium armor, and unless you're multi-classing and taking a heavy armor proficiency, strength isn't really going to make a lot of sense on a Bard, but that totally is a viable option, and we'll talk about multi-classing a little bit near the end. But for me, I'm going to have Sleight of Hand and Stealth proficiency right away at level 1 with my high dex. That means I'm going to be a perfectly good scout for those first few levels. My only place I'm really going to struggle is perception, so noticing things. I'm not going to necessarily find all the secret interactables, but in terms of opening chests and doors, I'll be totally fine at that, and I can definitely sneak around. The race I went with for this build is the Half-Elf, and once again, this is mostly just to emulate the ability scores at launch. So we have two 16s, a 14, two 10s, and an 8, which is the array that I would feel really comfortable with. Obviously, increasing Charisma as your primary stat, and then Dex up to 16. This gives you a lot of flexibility, especially in the first few levels. You're going to be running in with the Rapier, which the Bard does get to start with, and you'll be totally fine in melee combat, or even with the hand crossbow that you start off with as a Bard, and you'll be doing solid ranged combat. So you're not really missing out by not having a really useful like ranged damage cantrip. And you do have obviously full caster ability, so you have lots of spells and things to do on your turn. But even when you're out of resources, your attacks are going to be just fine for the first few levels of the game to fill in the gaps. Now, your actual abilities, let's talk about these. So right away, you're a full caster. So even though you still have totally fine melee combat and some decent proficiencies that let you use hand crossbows and things like that, you are a full caster. You have a fairly large selection of spells to pick from. Now, we already have Blade Ward from being a half high elf, so I would choose something different, maybe something like Friends, to be a little bit more persuasive, and this is going to let you get advantage on save or on ability checks during conversations. So anything you're using with your charisma, and you already have such high charisma score and proficiency in a lot of those conversation skills that you're going to make a fantastic party face. So you'll be really good in conversations, and especially for my first playthrough, I really like something like the Bard, where I'm going to have so many options to persuade and deceive and do all that kind of stuff. So that's where I would go with. And then obviously Vicious Mockery is great. It's a 1d4 damage cantrip that does scale as you level. The damage is fairly pitiful. We're not going to worry about doing damage with the spell, but it does provide disadvantage on attack rolls. So this is just a nice way to debuff your enemies. It's a wisdom based save, so oftentimes you'll be using this on like a big dumb ogre on the front line that has a low wisdom score but a really threatening attack, and this can be sometimes useful, but it is a little bit more situational, and largely I love it for the flavor, as many people do. Just the idea of making fun of someone to death, it's going to happen, and that can be fun. Onto the leveled spells. So there's quite a few spells here that are really powerful. Heroism and Tasha's Hideous Laughter, these are kind of like the recommended ones. I would take them off, and for the first couple levels, I really like Sleep and Fairy Fire. So you're playing more of a control role, and especially at lower levels, I find that having these big area of effect spells when you only have a few spell slots is a little bit better. Tasha's is something that I would absolutely take because it's a really powerful single target control spell, but when you don't have as many spell slots, it's a little bit better to do something that's either going to be more reliable, like Sleep, or is going to hit a whole bunch of targets like Fairy Fire. And in the first 3 or so levels of the game, Sleep is completely nuts. It hits targets with up to 24 hit points and just puts them to sleep. So it's a fantastic spell to control 1 or 2 enemies without needing to do any checks or anything like that. Likewise, Fairy Fire, it has a dexterity saving throw, which is fairly common, especially against some of the early enemies in the game, but it has a nice big AoE, a nice long range, and if you're hitting 3 or 4 enemies, you're going to have a couple of them get that disadvantage on their defense. Essentially, all your allies are going to get advantage when attacking them, and this significantly increases your chance to hit. So if you're having pre-buffing with Bless, and then you're casting Fairy Fire to start a fight or on the first round of combat, you're going to do a ton of work and you're really going to clean up fights quickly. Obviously, Healing Word lets you be that backline healer, picking up your allies that fall down in combat, and this is fantastic. And then you do have a few other kind of interesting support spells. Nod to Speak to Animals, lots of great dialogue options, and I would recommend having this available on your character in some way, shape, or form for your first playthrough, just because it is so fun, and Larian does a fantastic job of putting in hilarious animals to talk to, and they always have great personalities and lots of secrets and things that are unlocked by talking to your furry friends. Charm Person is very similar to Friends, the cantrip, so it has uses, but I personally find Friends is like sufficient if you want to use it. Thunderwave is a nice little blaster spell, it does some damage and an AoE knockback. I also really like Dissonant Whispers. It's a bit more of a single target nuke, but the way I treat it is it does half damage when enemies make their saving throw. So I almost save it as like that guaranteed finisher. If there's an enemy that's at low health and I'm in a position where I really need to kill them before they take their next action, I can use Dissonant Whispers and just pick them off for sure. And sometimes if you have the spell slot kicking around, it does just do a lot of damage, so it is totally fine to use. And then the Frightened condition, this is different than the tabletop. They just get disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls. It lasts for 2 turns, so it is a pretty powerful debuff. So once again, if there's like that big scary ogre in the front line that's going to do a lot of melee attacks and a lot of damage, using Dissonant Whispers, it'll often have a good chance of hitting, and it'll severely debuff them. Special shout out also to Bane, which is a powerful debuff that targets up to 3 creatures. It's a charisma saving throw, which is a very, very difficult save for most monsters to make, which is fantastic. I don't really like Animal Friendship. I think it's kind of a waste, and I think Longstrider and Featherfall, as well as Disguise Self, like there's better things you could be doing with your spell slots, at least at the early game. And yeah, so that's the kind of the selection. I would recommend an array like this. It gives you a nice mix of like a single target nuke, a heal, and a couple of area of effect spells that are going to augment or debuff your enemies, rather. And then, yeah, you can obviously pick your starting instrument as well. I like the violin, so I'm going to keep that. And then finally, last but not least, we have Bardic Inspiration. So Bardic Inspiration is a really cool ability. It takes a bonus action, and you're giving a dice to an ally that they can spend to use to augment an attack roll or a saving throw. So they can use it offensively or defensively. Early on in the game, you're most likely going to be spending these on attack rolls, but there is a little note that I want to talk about with this. I highly recommend disabling the automatic use of Bardic Inspiration. So Larian they received a lot of pushback on this because a lot of these abilities in the early access version of the game had just an automatic use. You just toggled it and it would use it when you could. But a lot of these abilities are only good when you get to make an informed decision. So Bardic Inspiration is one of those. And this example here is showing you that, I rolled 24. I don't need to use my Bardic Inspiration, where if you didn't toggle this, it would just automatically use it and it would let you roll like 30 to hit. Woohoo! Doesn't do anything. So click that button, go back, make sure you have ask for Bardic Inspiration. It might slow down the flow of combat a little bit, but it's going to make sure that you get the most out of Bardic Inspiration. So highly recommended, and this is going to get you a lot more value for your bard. So that's level 1. Let's talk about level 2. So at level 2, bards get Jack of all trades, which is going to give them half of their proficiency bonus to every single ability check that you are not already proficient in. This is really what makes bards reasonable at everything. So nice bonus there. You get Song of Rest. This is a little different than in the tabletop version of the game, which just lets you kind of give additional healing at the end of a short rest. This actually just gives you an additional short rest in Baldur's Gate 3, so that's really powerful. It makes bards pair really well with, a battle master fighter or a warlock that's going to take advantage of those short rests. And then obviously you get another spell. So we talked about those already. I'm just going to take Speak with Animals because it's going to be fun to play around with in this first few levels. And that's where we're going for level 2. Onward to level 3. At level 3, bards get to make a really interesting choice in terms of the college they would like to join. So you have 3 choices come launch. You're going to have College of Lore, College of Valor, and College of Swords. There's a few benefits for each, but overall, College of Lore is going to give you more skills, and you're going to be a little bit more of a spellcaster, because one of the main features that College of Lore gets is they can take spells from any class's spell slot at 6th level as well as 10th level. It should be noted that all bards are going to have that ability to dip into any class's spell list at level 10 and pick up some really neat spells. So you only get a couple of spells when you do this. So lore bards are just going to have, double the amount of these bonus spells, which lets you take really, really powerful, impactful spells you wouldn't otherwise get. But it should be noted that the bard spell list is actually quite good. And a lot of the spells in Baldur's Gate 3 work a little bit differently than in the pen and paper version. So we don't know exactly what those high level spell slots or spells rather are going to do exactly yet. So, obviously the fallback is 6th level, take Fireball. Your bard can function sort of as a wizard, blow things up as a blaster. You still have Hypnotic Pattern and a lot of powerful control and support spells. You can take another, powerful, impactful buff spell as well. And you'll be totally fine. But if you want your bard to be a little bit more of a skirmisher, you're still going to be a full caster with lots of powerful attacks and debuffs. You could take something like College of Valor, which is going to give you 2 weapon attacks at 6th level. And then once you hit 10th level, you can actually do some real shenanigans, and you can take something like Swift Quiver from the Ranger spell. And a College of Valor bard actually puts rangers to shame when it comes to being an archer, because of your ability to make 4 attacks per round with the right spells, additionally enchanting your attacks with magic. And you can even do things by taking a couple dips, like 2 levels in fighter to get the archery fighting style and action surge, and then 10 levels of bard, and you could be popping off, as it were, as an archer if you're going College of Valor. You can also, as College of Swords and College of Valor, you're doing more damage, obviously. College of Valor lets you use your Bardic Inspiration as a combat buff, a damage buff for your allies, which is going to just overall increase your party's damage potential. It just gives you a little bit more flexibility, because you can do something where you give Bardic Inspiration to your frontline character, they swing, you see if it's going to hit. If it is going to hit, you don't use it for the attack roll, and then once they land, you can decide, oh, this is how much damage they're doing, look at their hit points, do I need to add the additional damage? And you get a lot of flexibility, and you're always going to get value out of your Bardic Inspirations that way. Bardic College of Valor bards rather also get medium armor proficiency as a bonus, so this is just a nice thing to have. And they also get shield proficiency. Martial weapon proficiency doesn't necessarily matter as much. It's going to let you use a longbow, which is cool. But in terms of shield proficiency, if you're a half elf or a human, you're already going to have that. And the medium armor proficiency is nice. But all combined, at third level as a College of Valor bard, you can have 18 AC. So you put on some scale mail, you put a shield on, and you're using your rapier. You're fairly tanky. You can be up there with the frontline. You don't quite have the hit points that some of your other frontline characters are going to have, but in terms of your AC and your overall resilience, especially because we took Blade Ward as our cantrip, we can pre-buff ourselves with Blade Ward, have our 18 AC, and we're going to be totally safe in the front line of combat if we need to, or just skirting around the edges even. But we're gonna definitely be someone who can take a lot of hits. College of Lore, as I mentioned, is more of a caster based bard. They have a few different features. They get additional proficiencies, so you get 3 proficiencies in Arcana, Intimidation, and Sleight of Hand. Come release, these will not be fixed proficiencies, meaning you'll be able to just pick any 3 new proficiencies you want. If you are playing in the early access, obviously you'd want to make sure that you don't take any backgrounds or proficiencies in Intimidation or Sleight of Hand or Arcana at level 1, because you're going to get them for free if you're going College of Lore. This is going to open up a lot more options for your character as being that sort of skill monkey character, being able to make all those outside of combat ability checks. You also get, regardless of your college, expertise, and this lets you pick any skill that you have proficiency in and double your proficiency bonus. So if you pick Sleight of Hands and Persuasion, for example, this is going to let me open a lot of locks, and this is going to let me be a really good party face. Building up this character to both sort of fulfill that role of the rogue / the party face. This is great. One thing it should be noted that's maybe a little unfortunate is that you cannot inspire yourself. So a lot of times you're going to have amazing skill proficiencies, but if you did have a character that also has expertise and skills, like a rogue in your party, for example, they're going to have this +7, and then you can additionally give them your Bardic Inspiration die to really push them over the top. So that's something to consider there as well. Now, let's talk about the level 2 spells. So bards actually have access to some fantastic spells with a wide variety of options that are going to let them fill quite a few different roles. So they have some powerful debuffs, things like blind. You'll notice it just lasts 10 turns. There's no concentration, which makes it really good. It's going to give your enemies disadvantage on all their attacks, and they won't be able to target you with a lot of spells because they're blind. So this can be a powerful debuff. It does have a con save, which does mean it is going to be resisted frequently. So maybe not a great choice, especially at early levels. It's not going to have a huge impact. Calm Emotions can be okay. I'm not necessarily a fan of this spell in terms of it's just going to make it so they can't be charmed or frightened, which isn't super impactful. It's not like in the tabletop version where you can like end a fight and calm everyone down and then like, RP it out. Cloud of Daggers compared to the tabletop version is actually a completely nuts spell, because the way this works in Baldur's Gate 3 is it's a circle instead of taking up a single square, and you're not relying on the DM letting you place it creatively on the grid. You can hit easily 2 to 3 enemies, especially if you're in a choke point or you kind of bog them down with a spell like Web or even just like Grease and they're fallen prone. And this will do damage the second you cast it, and then the second they start their turn in it. So it does a ton of damage. Enemies will run through it. It'll hit 2 or 3 times. And oftentimes, if you're hitting at least 2 enemies in it and you know they're going to start their turn in it when it comes up, it's worth casting. And even just being able to push or shove enemies back into it, you can get so much value out of a Cloud of Daggers. And I've had this thing trigger 2 or 3 times on 2 or 3 enemies. So really, you're getting so much value out of this spell. it can be deceptively powerful in Baldur's Gate 3 and it should not be overlooked. So I actually really like this as my level 3 spell to take. It's just going to give me some options to just straight up kill things instantly with my spell slots. Some other cool options, obviously Crown of Madness. This you can cast on an enemy frontliner character and they will just start turning around and slapping their allies. You want to cast this ideally from stealth at the beginning of combat before the front line gets to you, because it's just going to make them attack the closest thing. And if that's one of your characters, it's not going to be helpful. Detect thoughts. This is a fun RP sort of thing that you can use. It's, Larian has put a lot of effort into all the dialogue options and these RP spells. These spells should not be overlooked. Your DM in the tabletop version, your mileage may vary with how fun this spell is, but Larian, they've put stuff in this game that you will not see if you don't take this spell. So there might be some options for taking this just in your playthrough to see more content. I don't know if I would take it because it's not necessarily what I want to do, and I love like the tactical combat spells, and like that's just what I have fun with. But I honestly, on a second playthrough, I would take something like this just to see some of those options, and get a different experience. Enhance ability. This, if you want to be that skill monkey character, if you want to be that character that has advantage on all your ability checks, you're opening all the locks, you take this, it's going to help you in conversations. You can pick the ability when you cast it. So it's a concentration spell, but outside of combat, this is going to be completely insane. Heat metal is disgustingly powerful. This is a con save, but once they're wearing the armor, they always have disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. You can use your bonus action on subsequent turns to continue dealing the fire damage over and over and over. And if you use it on their armor, they can't just take their armor off. So at least in the tabletop version, that's my experience. But it only works if they're wearing metal armor. So there are some limitations in who you can target. But when you target somebody with this, it tends to be incredibly devastating. Another completely devastating spell is Hold Person. You completely paralyze someone, and in addition to making them unable to act or move, they just lose their turn as long as you maintain your concentration, which makes this one of the best CC spells in the game. You automatically crit on anyone who's paralyzed, so this is also going to let you quickly dispatch them. Invisibility turns you invisible, does what it says. This is really useful for stealth and sneaking around. Obviously, it's going to give you advantage on stealth checks. It does break as soon as you attack or cast a spell, but has a lot of uses for kiting, or if you're in a bad situation, you can just turn invisible and get out of there, because when you're invisible, you don't trigger attacks of opportunity. Lesser Restoration, it removes disease or conditions afflicting a creature. It's personally, I find this typically is not worth it. There's other things you could be spending on. Phantasmal Force is kind of cool. It's like a damage over time that has a neat flavor, but it doesn't do a ton. But it does last a long time, so it can do things that are okay. But generally, I don't think it's worth it. The Shatter is sort of like your baby fireball. It's just a medium-sized AoE. It does 3d8 thunder damage, a decent amount of damage. It's reasonable if you're looking to kind of fill in that like bit of a blaster roll, and then you can scale this up obviously as well. So when you're upscaling this, it kind of can fill the role of like a poor man's fireball in those situations where you want to finish off like a couple of enemies or there's a cluster of enemies. And because it does the damage, even if they make their saving throw, it is really nice for those situations where you see that they're at low health and you just want to finish them off. But Cloud of Daggers often is going to do a similar amount of damage and is also going to do that damage the next turn and then the next turn. And so oftentimes it feels like you're going to get, if you're hitting 2 ticks of Cloud of Daggers, it's doing a lot more than one tick of Shatter. So the AoE is a little bit smaller, but generally speaking, these are kind of comparable. I prefer Cloud of Daggers. As you get higher level, obviously you can have both. And then finally, silence is kind of neat. It makes it so spells aren't going to happen. Any spells with verbal components just don't go off. So you can completely eliminate casters sometimes by just kind of trapping them and then silencing them. That can be a cool ability. It also makes you immune to thunder damage, so you can't be shattered, for example, or you can't be thunder waved. You won't take the damage from those. So just kind of there is like some anti synergy because a lot of the bard damaging spells are doing thunder damage. You know, big sonic booms. So think about that synergy there. But otherwise, there's lots of uses for this. And yeah, that's the bard spell list. Lots of fun utility again. I really like Cloud of Daggers in Baldur's Gate 3. This is sort of like the sleeper hit for me. So I would recommend playing around with them if you have the early access. But obviously, if you're watching this, maybe you don't, and you just want to get some other opinions. So there's one for you there. I love Cloud of Daggers, and that is what I'm going to take for my second level spell slot at level 3 on my College of Lore Bard. And yeah, let's talk a little bit about multi-classing your Bard. So bards, because they use charisma as one of their primary stats as well as dexterity, have a lot of classes that they synergize really well with. And I'm going to talk about some of my favorite combinations. So bard pairs incredibly well with paladin for 2 levels. One of my favorite characters in the tabletop version of the game was a 6th level Valor Bard with 2 levels of Paladin, and I sort of called it like a glory chanter sort of character, and I did have like a whole story around it, and I think even like the feel of it is like this, you know, kind of Paladin, like plate wearing Bard character that was all about like, you know, bringing the holy glory song everywhere he went. Was really fun character design, and it is incredibly powerful. With Valor Bard at level 6, you get 2 melee attacks, so you're not really missing out on that. And then obviously you have way more spells and spell slots than a typical paladin, but you still have the smites. So you're able to completely decimate single targets. It makes you a really powerful striker. The plate proficiency for being a paladin lets you be a really powerful frontline character, and there's lots of cool options there. You'll still have access to quite a few powerful higher level bard spells. If you go all the way up to 10 levels of bard and just stay with only the 2 levels of paladin, you do miss out on a few paladin goodies, but you'll still get the ability to pick spells from any caster's list at level 12. 10 levels of bard as a valor bard, which is fun. So a fun combination, pretty powerful, definitely worth putting together. Likewise, a very classic combination is the bard / warlock. I already mentioned how the Song of Rest pairs really well with a warlock because it gives you an extra short rest per long rest. So why not also be the warlock in your party? The Bard Warlock is great because you get Eldritch Blast, which scales with your charisma. This means you don't really need anything else in terms of single target damage. You just take 2 levels of Warlock that gives you 2 of your packed spell slots, and you're going to be able to use those for Hex and some of the other unique Warlock spells throughout the game, which are, there's a few that are worth considering. But mainly just having Hex is totally fine, and even just taking something like Charm Person, that's like, because you're not going to have things, these slots aren't going to scale as well. So having something that you can just use over and over, it'll be totally fine, and even just using those spell slots for your other spells. It gives you, really, it's Eldritch Blast with Agonizing Blast as your main damage spell. So you can go 2 levels of Warlock and then 10 levels of Bard. You're still mostly a Bard, but you just have a really powerful cantrip. And that also gives you enough ability score increases to max out your charisma. And you're going to be totally fine. You can go any style of Bard you want. You could even go into a Valor Bard and be sort of like a kind of get the Hexblade thing going on. You would potentially want to go one step further to get Pact of the Blade, but Warlock Bard, there's a lot of powerful combos there. There's also taking one level of Sorcerer, specifically if you go Draconic Sorcerer is really popular. And when you take some of the options, I believe it's this one, the white gives you Armor of Agathis, which is a unique spell that you can get, which is really powerful. And you also get Constitution saving throws as a sorcerer, which is really, really important. So this is going to make it so whenever you're making a concentration check on your spells, you have that additional proficiency, which is going to mean your concentration is going to be broken a lot less. So bards don't actually get that, and that's something to look out for. So even just one level of sorcerer and then the rest of your levels in bard just makes you a little bit better in terms of those casting things. And then you also get just a few kind of fun bits with you get one extra hit point, and then you get some draconic resilience, which just boosts your AC. So especially if you're going for something like a lore bard where you're more of a caster, you're not going to get into the medium armor. This would give you 18 AC pretty early on. If you're a human or half elf, you already get the shield proficiency for free. You're getting the 16 AC just by being naked all the time. And then the +2 with the shield. So that's another powerful combination. So I think those are kind of the default that I would say is, paladin, sorcerer, warlock make the most sense for a bard. Pretty straightforward. Even 2 levels of fighter though for a valor bard, as I mentioned, like it gets you action surge and lets you have that strength or the heavy armor proficiency if you wanted to do more of a strength valor bard. Totally a viable option. And the valor bard as well, like you could be a bard with a big 2-handed sword. Lots of flexibility there. And so that's a whole bunch of different things to think about for creating a bard. As I mentioned before, this is my favorite class in 5th edition. You can really play any role you want with this class. They can do it all. And a lot of times you don't even have to focus that hard. You can actually just do it all and do it all quite well. So bards are going to be, this is pretty well guaranteed the first character I'm going to make come launch. This is what I hopefully will be playing through on my first playthrough. And it looks like it's going to be so much fun. I'm really excited for Baldur's Gate 3 in just a few days now. So once again, if you're still here, if you're still listening, thank you so much. I appreciate your support, and I will catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.